Haha! Welcome to the mirror universe where everything is defined by toxicity, where no one can agree on what is better, but we never find any unity. We don't respect others' opinions. We demand that our opinion is the only one, and anyone else should be stabbed and gotten rid of and exorcised from the community. Oh God. Are we in the mirror universe? Alright, I hope that was some fun, dark humor for you. But today, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be ranking every single episode of the Mirror Universe in Star Trek, from the original series all the way until Discovery. And this was a topic selected by one of my Patreons, Stephen Schuhart, which allows him to have me select a movie series, a season of TV, or a comic series that he wanted me to review. And he actually chose to have me review every single Mirror Universe episode, which I was so excited about. So that's my quick little plug for my Patreon. If you want to have me do reviews, there's some other really cool perks. Head on over to my Patreon, where you can donate a little bit of money. It really helps me out. Every little bit counts to make these videos even better, and you can actually dictate some of the content that I make. Dictate. That's a funny word. I was actually super excited when Steven actually suggested that I do the Mirror Universe episodes. I have always been fascinated by Mirror Universe and alternate universe stories in general, especially in Star Trek. I always love this sort of what if idea, or different sides of the same coin. As someone who is transgender and bisexual, not that this video is going to be about that, but it is sort of dual sides and seeing things from a different perspective have always been something that have interested me, just artistically and, obviously in my own identity. This even goes back to when I was a little kid, where I actually used to write a Star Trek fan fiction called Star Trek Mirror Wars, which was set in the 29th century and had the Terran Empire, which had been rebuilt by that point, invading our universe. It was really bad, really complicated. It was written by a 14-year-old, and I think still exists somewhere on the internet. So have fun looking for that. And another thing that I think really worked about the Mirror Universe episodes as they were written was that they were actually done very sparingly. Star Trek: The Original Series only did one episode there, which kind of par for the course. That show only did like sort of one-offs and only had one two-parter. TNG didn't touch it at all, neither did Voyager. Deep Space Nine used it the most out of all the series, except for maybe Discovery. We'll see if Discovery eventually comes back to it, but Discovery was kind of pushing close. Had an episode pretty much every season, I think, except for seasons 1 and 4? I might be wrong on that number, but I think one Mirror Universe episode every season besides 1 and 4. And actually fairly concurrently had a through-line story throughout all of them that kind of got lost at the end there, and I'll talk about that in a minute when I get into the rankings. And we had one two-parter in Enterprise, and then a whole segment in Discovery that took place. And you could even argue that the whole season 1 of Discovery kind of has a Mirror Universe influence through Lorca. But overall, generally, considering how long Star Trek has been around, in 50 years or so of canon, the fact that they've only used the Mirror Universe so sparingly is probably what makes it so potent. Because honestly, I don't think there's a dud on this list. Like I said, I'm going to be ranking them from best to worst, or worst to best, I should say. But I don't think there's a single Mirror Universe episode that's bad. There are certainly bad episodes of Star Trek, and so it's surprising to find, like, you pick one sort of topic within Star Trek, you're going to have some duds. And really, while there are varying degrees of goodness within the episodes, I don't think there's a dud in this bunch. And that's what made ranking these actually very hard. I went back and forth a lot on these. But that being said, it was my job. I was commissioned to do it, so I'm going to rank them, and let's get into it. So, rules on this Mirror Universe ranking. I'm going to be ranking every episode from the worst to the best from every single series. I'm going to be counting every Discovery episode that featured the Mirror Universe as its own separate episode, so they'll be ranked differently. I'm not sort of counting them all as one chunk. I debated going back and forth if I want to just be just analyzing the Discovery episodes as one whole and placing it within the ranking, just because it's a little bit harder with Discovery, especially season 1, where it's a bit more serialized, to sort of pull episodes out of that storytelling. But going back and rewatching it, I actually found I had a lot of different things I wanted to say about each individual episode, so I decided to rank them separately. Alright, at the very bottom of my list is Star Trek Deep Space Nine's episode Resurrection. This is the episode where Mirror Universe Vedek Bareil comes aboard the station. Vedek Bareil hadn't been around since seasons 1 or season 2, and Kira Nerys falls back in love with this Mirror Universe someone who she had feelings for in our universe, even though he's a very different man than the Vedek Bareil that she knew. Eventually we learned that Vedek Bareil actually wasn't trying to run from the Klingon Cardassian Empire like he said, but was actually working for Mirror Universe Kira to try and steal the orb. So the good first. I actually think that the Kira Vedek Bareil stuff was very well written and very well done in this episode. I think it really kind of showed a growth on Kira's part that we see you know, a romance coming back that we hadn't really seen since season 1 and 2 of the series, come back all the way again in season 6 and show how those wounds still exist within her character. But also show how much she's actually grown in those intervening years, that she's able to detect Belial and not fully trust him and can read him better than this character who probably would have been seduced by him more at the beginning of the series and been a little bit more, been more of a zealot in her belief in trusting a Vedic and trusting someone that she loved. And I love that we sort of see this nuanced growth within Kira here. That being said, this episode ranks at the bottom of my list, mostly because a lot of the beats that we see in this episode, number one, are fairly obvious. Everything that you expect to happen in this sort of episode where you have sort of a version of a character come back, we've seen this numerous times across Star Trek and other science fiction storylines, this episode doesn't really add anything new to it. It's like, yes, he betrays her. Yes, he actually eventually comes back to her because he cares about her, and he's a changed man now because he learns about the version of himself that Kira sees, and like, oh, I can be a good man, and learns to be better. It's all fairly cliche, and we've seen it before. And also, this episode comes in Deep Space Nine's 6th season, and a lot of this ground that we see covered with like a Mirror Universe version learning to live up to their Prime Universe good, better counterpart has actually already kind of been done in previous episodes of Deep Space Nine, and even in the original series, Mirror Mirror episode kind of had that as well. So it really isn't treading any new ground. But I mean, this episode's still wonderful. We still have a wonderful performance by Nina Visitor on both versions of herself. And I'll talk a little bit more about Mirror, Kira, and Nerys in later episodes, but easily the best thing about the Deep Space Nine Mirror Universe episodes is Mirror, Kira, and Nerys. Just easily. But I'll get into that a little bit more. And also, I should say, the climax at the end of the episode, where they're sort of in the temple arguing over the orb, is kind of just really weak. Kira just shows up, talks to Belial, and then Mirror Kira comes in, Belial shoots her, and then they talk it out, and everyone just leaves A-okay. There's no real consequences, no real stakes. I never really believed anything was actually going to happen. So this episode really just kind of feels weak in that regard. It just resolves too quickly, and nothing is really surprising. Alright, the next episode on my list is the last Deep Space Nine Mirror Universe episode, Emperor's New Cloak. This episode's actually a lot of fun, mostly because it's probably the only Mirror Universe episode, besides maybe the Enterprise episode, that gets into a lot of comedy. And actually plays the Mirror Universe for a lot of laughs, and we mainly focus on our Ferengi characters. And what I liked about that is it used the Mirror Universe inversion to actually show that how Quark has grown as a character, and that Quark's the one teaching Ezri Dax, the Mirror Universe Ezri Dax, to be a better person. That our universe Quark is a better person than most people in the Mirror Universe. I thought that was a nice little twist, and that Quark teaching morality was, this was a good way to do that. There's also a lot of fun comedic beats in this episode. I think Rom being confused about how this universe isn't really a parallel universe because things aren't totally different. They're just kind of adjunct or slightly aside. It's a fun recurring joke throughout the episode. The way Garak is played here comedically is a lot of fun. I do find it interesting, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about Garak and when I get into future episodes, because I do like his Mirror Universe character. I think they do some interesting things with his Mirror Universe counterpart. But I also find it surprising that the Mirror Universe Garak isn't as evil as he could be. He could be a lot more nefarious for a character we know does some really terrible stuff in our universe. So to see him do not that, like, he's clearly an evil dictator. You don't really see him doing anything explicitly all that evil. But I do like seeing Garak being placed sort of low in the power rung of the Mirror Universe. It's just fun to see him sort of weasel and connive and do his Garak sort of playing around thing that he does, but in a way where he doesn't really hold all the cards anymore. You normally used to Garak knowing way more than he actually lets on, whereas here, this Garak pretty much is just trying to play with the crap hand that he's dealt, and really is just trying to do his best to get back to the top. And I think that's a lot of fun and an interesting way to take his character. And I think it's fun how Quark and the Ferengi are able to play off of that in this episode. Again, some weaknesses here. While I do love Ezri Dax, I'm actually a big fan of Ezri the character. Her characterization in this episode is fairly weak. It's like biker chick Ezri. She's like, ugh, I'm evil and emo, and I'm into Kira Nerys because I'm bisexual for some reason, because bisexuals are evil and promiscuous. Sorry, that's a different video. I've made it already. Go check it out. It'll be up here. But yeah, she's kind of a dull character, and they don't really do much with her here. This episode has a lot more going for it than Resurrection, but ultimately it doesn't really do anything super exciting or new, but there is some good comedic beats and elements within it. Also, fun fact, this episode was directed by LeVar Burton of Geordie fame, so that's kind of fun and interesting. Alright, so the next episode on my list is the first Star Trek Discovery episode, Vaulting Ambition. This actually holds the distinction of being one of the shortest Star Trek episodes ever made. I think probably the shortest, not counting the animated series. I might be wrong on that, but I'm fairly sure I am correct. And this episode, it's ranked lower on my list, mostly because it's just a transitional episode. It's kind of getting us from point A to point B for the big sort of grand Mirror Universe finale in the next episode. So it's just kind of connecting the dots, and that's why it's so short. But I do really like this episode, mostly because there are a lot of memorable moments within it. There are a lot of things that happen in this episode, and I'm like, that's a cute little beat, that's a cute little beat. And while the episode doesn't really ever coalesce into anything super great on its own, mostly because, again, it's just going from point A to point B, it does have those strong moments that bolster it up. We have the really fun dinner scene with Emperor Georgiou where they're eating Kelpian ganglia, which was super gross. I didn't ever expect to be gagging when seeing characters eat an alien non-existent life form, but knowing that that was Saru or someone like Saru really made me feel very sick to my stomach, and it was just a very well done, effective scene and made perfect sense for the Mirror Universe. I also really like the start of the building of the Emperor Georgiou and Burnham relationship here that we obviously know grows into season 2 and probably beyond. So you're starting to get hints of that, about Emperor Georgiou really cares about Burnham but doesn't trust her, and Burnham obviously clearly doesn't trust her but can't help separate her from the Georgiou that she knows. And so it creates this interesting dichotomy between the two that, again, just keeps growing and has been built into such a rich and complex relationship going forward throughout all of Discovery. I also think that the Stamets and Culber scene where they kiss is really a beautiful, well-done scene, and could have been a good ending for their character if they hadn't brought Culber back, and I'm glad they did, but that's a separate episode about Bury Your Gaze and how they treated Culber. That's a whole different discussion. But I do like this sort of capper off here in this episode. I thought it was a sweet way for them to say goodbye. That being said, and I'll say this again with another episode further on this list, the Stamets subplots in these Mirror Universe episodes kind of didn't go anywhere. I was actually super excited for them. I was super excited to see Stamets interacting with his Mirror Universe self. We don't often see that in Mirror Universe episodes with characters interacting with their alternate selves, which is surprising. You'd think that they do that more often, but it's actually fairly rare. So I was excited to see them get extended time together, but nothing really ever comes of it. It's just mostly used as exposition, an exposition that really didn't need to be this long and this drawn out. It could have been told in a single scene, but there are multiple scenes with Stamets and his Mirror Universe self that don't really do anything special, which is kind of disappointing. So that's kind of why it gets lower on this list. And another scene that I really do love is I love the Lorca reveal in this episode. I think they played it super well with the scene with the guy basically saying, say her name, do you remember her name? And you think it's because he's the Prime Lorca and he wouldn't remember her name, or he's just, if you had guessed that he was the Mirror Universe Lorca at that point, then he was just playing this game of like, oh, I'm pretending to still be Prime Lorca here. But I like the reveal that he legitimately does not remember her name, that he is that person, he is the Mirror Lorca, and he doesn't remember her name because he's an asshole. It was such a great reveal for his character, and it's such a great way to reveal that and give that little piece of who he actually is in this universe. It was very dark and diabolical and played really well right up to the moment that the twist occurred. It was just such a great twist, and shows that he's willing to let people die over like something stupid like a name. It just, such a very, very well done writing for that. I also should say we get some great scenes with Laurel here where she helps to help Tyler become his full self. It's a bit confusing and not exactly clear what's going on, and they never really make clear what's going on with Tyler, but I do love the moments with Laurel and Saru. And Saru basically being like, you gotta do this. You need to be a good person, that he is dying, and it's on you if you don't do it. And Saru really stepping up here and becoming a really strong captain. I thought the scenes with Laurel and Saru in this episode fantastic, especially for Doug Jones, just really building up Saru's character. All right, next up on this list is the Deep Space Nine episode Shattered Mirror. This is the episode where Jennifer Sisko from the universe, who had met in the previous episode, comes over to our universe, kidnaps Jake Sisko to help get Benjamin Sisko to come help them finish the Defiant to stop a fleet of Klingon ships that are coming to attack the rebels on Deep Space Nine. I think it was really smart to, after doing an episode where Sisko got to see Jennifer again. And this is really the only time we get these 2 episodes, are really the only episodes that we actually get to know Jennifer in any way, shape, or form, because she had been fridged and killed before Deep Space Nine even began. So these are the only time we actually get to see her interact with her husband and son. And I really like Jake not being able to let her go and just really just being enamored with this person who isn't his mother, but kind of is, and she getting enamored with him as well, and Benjamin feeling uncomfortable with the whole thing and feeling like this isn't quite right and I don't know how I feel about it. And it was such a good development after he had saved her in the previous episode that we had seen her in, that you see him understand the discomfiture that he has with knowing that this isn't really her, and this isn't really the person that he fell in love with. And it was easy to just sort of be like, I love you, you're the person I care about, and then she dies and that makes him feel sad. But I just like seeing Benjamin being adult enough to know this isn't the person I love, and having that maturity and understanding that this is kind of unhealthy for my son. That's such a strong, very nuanced idea going on here about fatherhood and motherhood and being a kid who's had a parent die. I really love the Worf-Garak interactions with the sort of BDSM stuff going on in Garak. Again, like I said earlier, kind of having this sniveling, sniving, sort of like conniving, trying to like, I'm just trying to, not die here. What do you want me to do? I'll do anything, I'll say anything, just don't kill me. I thought that was such a fun place to put the character of Garak, because again, you usually just don't see him at that low level of power and not having any really cards to play. He's just sort of like, I'm just gonna try not to die. And it was just very humorous. It was very fun to see Worf sort of having this sort of BDSM chain pulling Garak by. Just really fun and clever. Every scene with Garak and Worf in this. And he actually stabs Garak at one point, which is great. I think the only part of this episode that I really don't quite love is how they kill off Jennifer Sisko. It feels gratuitous. I understand why the writers would have the impetus to be like, oh, we want to kill her and have, Jake and Ben kind of deal with that loss again. But it just feels like traumatizing them for the sake of traumatizing them. And again, they're fictional characters, so traumatize them, whatever. I'm not saying it's like a bad thing, you're a bad person to do that, but if you're gonna make them go through this trauma, have it mean something, especially on a show like Deep Space Nine, where stuff always kind of carried over, that it did have a weight to it. There was a serialized story being told, and here it's just sort of like, all right, we're gonna kill her again, and we're never really gonna bring it up or address it ever again. And so it was just kind of sad to just see them do that and not do anything with it, and just feeling like you're hurting these characters just for the sake of hurting them because it's dramatic. I feel like there could have just been a better way to do it. I'm not saying you couldn't kill her, but I feel like you should have done a little bit more to it. And also, this isn't necessarily a problem with the episode in and of itself, but we do have this moment where Kira says, I have a debt, I saved you, Jake Sisko, so I'm going to ask for that debt to be paid later, and that plot never comes back up. Didn't need to, it's not really a problem with the episode. I wish they had, in one of the later Mirror Universe episodes, played with that a little bit. And the fact that it wasn't ever really paid off, that they didn't really have a plan for that, does kind of make it a little bit frustrating in the sense that it feels like, oh, they just did that so they didn't have to kill Jake, and they couldn't think of a better way to play that scene where, Jake lives but Jennifer dies. It's sort of like, oh, well, I guess I won't kill you now. It just reads kind of weak writing there. So yeah, that whole section of the episode kind of lowers this demonstrably, in my opinion, but this is in the middle of the list, and I do quite like it. All right, so next up is the Star Trek Discovery episode, Despite Yourself. So this was an episode I actually thought, when going into this list, that I thought I was going to be ranking actually higher on my list, but rewatching it actually placed it lower. Because again, this episode is the setup for the Mirror Universe episode. It's where all the characters are figuring out that, oh, we're in the Mirror Universe, we're in this dark place. The reason I thought I was going to rank this higher is, like I said in the other Discovery episode, there's a lot of moments in this episode that I really love. I actually remember so many beats in this episode that are really quite clever, quite fun, good little callbacks and Easter eggs. Like, for example, I love the moment where Tilly has to pretend to be the captain. Such a great character moment for her. It's like, what the heck?
Hello, this is Captain Tilly. What the hell? What the hell? Hold your horses.
Reveals a lot about her character, and it's a situation that's comedic, yet rife with tension. They also have a fun little Easter egg with Lorca doing this sort of Scottish engineer voice, kind of a callback to Scotty.
How you doing, Captain? Everything squared away here? We've got a wee bit of trouble with the visual emitters and the starboard nacelle, but Bit of tweaking, we'll be good to go.
You have the fun beat with all the characters putting on the Mirror Universe stuff and getting into the Mirror Universe uniforms. That was super cool. The agonizers that you see are actually terrifying. They're the first time that agonizers are actually really scary. And we see them a few times throughout the Mirror Universe episodes, but here they are really terrifying how you see them. There's that cool low gravity fight in the elevator where Burnham kills the one dude on the other ship. You also get some good Tilly moments here with her trying to pretend, how do I pretend to be a captain, and really kind of showing how her character is going to eventually grow to be a person who can be a captain. I like that the Mirror Universe of herself is a captain, showing that, you know, if she had confidence, she could do it, and she could do it well. Maybe with a little less evil, but very good. And surprisingly, this episode is very funny too. We have that Captain Killy thing, and I mentioned the Tilly stuff earlier. There's a lot of good humor in this episode. There's also a good callback to the USS Defiant that was in Enterprise in the original series, so that was a good little canon continuity there for all the people who hate Discovery because of quote-unquote outside of canon. But there are two things in this episode that really kind of bring it down for me. The first, most Star Trek fans when watching this episode, especially me, we already knew it was the Mirror Universe. Like, oh yeah, we're in the Mirror Universe now. And most of this episode is kind of built around them figuring out stuff that we already kind of know. And I know that that's not really something that they could have gone by. You kind of need to do that in this episode. You need to have the characters figuring out that they're in the Mirror Universe and dealing with it and explaining to people who maybe don't know much about the Mirror Universe, who hadn't seen Star Trek before. So I understand why it was necessary, but for me it was just kind of like, I get it, let's get to it. I kind of already know everything that you're telling me here. So the first time I watched it, it worked well. Subsequent reviewings, it just kind of gets a little bit of a like tediousness to it, or I'm just like, all right, let's get to the part that I care about. The second thing that I hate about this episode, and it requires a whole video of its own to talk about, so I'm only going to briefly touch upon it here, is the bury your gaze moment, where they kill Culber for a sort of shocking twist. Like, oh, Culber gets killed because we learn that Tyler is Voq, or we get hints at it in this episode. Which, was super upsetting. There are numerous videos, and I won't really touch upon it here, why bury your gaze trope is super hurtful and harmful, especially when they had built up that this was the first LGBT couple in Star Trek history, and then to kill one half of them, and the half of them that is a person of color, was kind of upsetting. I'm very glad that they brought Culber back, because I love Culber, I love Wilson Cruz, I love the character, and I'm glad that they sort of reversed that decision. But at the time, they sort of said, like, trust us, we have a reason for it, and the payoff later on the season and then in season 2 didn't really feel worth it. While I love Culber's storyline in season 2 and dealing with PTSD and trauma, it still kind of read like they didn't plan that initially. I might be wrong, but it kind of felt that way. That kind of ruins this episode a little bit for me in the rewatch. It was shocking at the time. I'm like, oh, that's interesting, but you know, rewatching it, I'm like, this doesn't pay off in the way that makes it feel worth the kind of pain that it brought. And again, there are many videos about bury your gaze trope. I'll probably do one myself at some point, so go watch those if you're unsure why the bury your gaze trope is actually very hard for many LGBT people to watch at sometimes. Next up is the last Star Trek Discovery episode, What's Past is Prologue. This is the cool one where we get the Lorca reveal. He fights Emperor Georgiou. There's a bunch of action beats in this episode. This episode's a lot of fun. Now, I've talked about in a previous video about my disappointment that Lorca didn't have a little bit more nuance to him this episode. I would have liked Lorca to have been a little bit more balanced, you know, have been influenced by his time in our universe. He's not just pure evil, but he kind of just becomes an evil person in this episode. But again, go check out that video. I discuss it there. That being said, this episode does have a lot of fun, cool action beats in it. There's some, like, the final fight at the end is great. Lorca killing Mir Stamets is really cool. And again, Stamets kind of playing that similar Garrick role where he's like, I'm used to knowing a little bit more than I have and kind of trying to snivel and connive my way out of this situation, and ultimately he can't do it. And Lorca's just like, just kill him. That's a fun beat. There's also some great Captain Saru moments. Captain Saru's speech in this episode, fantastic and really well acted and done by Doug Jones. And I also love a lot of little character beats, like Burnham saying, you know, if you had just asked, we would have helped you. And sort of Lorca completely misunderstanding the whole point of the Prime Universe. Like, if you just asked, we would have helped you, regardless of who you were. We would have helped you get back to your universe, because that's who we are. And yet you felt like you had to lie and cheat to get back here. I will say, it's also to the show's credit that they made me care when Lorca died. I was actually very upset that he died, even though he was a racist, terrible asshole. I was like, oh, this is a character that I really liked and found interesting, and I'm sad to see him go, even though he is a terrible person. And that's really hard to do. And so I give Discovery a lot of credit for being able to do that. So that's why this episode ranks so high, despite some of its flaws. I think it really was able to pay off some really great moments here. All right, next episode is Through the Looking Glass. This is the first episode with Jennifer Sisko where Benjamin gets taken to the mirror universe by Smiley to try and pretend to be Sisko. I love this episode quite a bit. It's a ton of fun. This conceit of Sisko pretending to be his mirror universe counterpart who's kind of an asshole but still doing the right thing is a lot of fun. There's some really great beats where he punches Bashir. We also get a fun Tuvok cameo in this episode. There's also, could be problematic though, they do pay it off in the next episode with Jennifer Sisko, the one I already reviewed, where Sisko sleeps with Dax, which I found fascinating. I always wonder if he told Jets, he was like, well, I had to sleep with the mirror universe version of you in the other universe, so that's a thing that happened. And the fact that he just does it is kind of hilarious. But I do like that they call back to it in the next episode where Jadzia comes up and slaps him and says, "You've slept with me under false pretenses."
That's for making love to me under false pretenses. I was suspicious of you from the start.
There's a conversation to be had about that and the interesting problematic nature there, but I do like that they at least address it and then it's brought back up and then it's sort of played for an interesting beat here that again I'm sort of like, I wonder if he ever told her in our universe. I also love that this episode sets up, and it's in the other episodes too, that there's always like a Ferengi death in the Mirror Universe episode. Every episode like kills either Quark, Rom, Nog. They all get murdered in these episodes. It's a good recurring subtle joke that they don't need to draw too much attention to, but it just keeps happening. And I also really love Jennifer Sisko here. I love Jennifer Sisko is in her interactions with Kira, Mira Kira. She is being kind of Gul Dukat here, basically saying like, look, I'm not the bad guy here. I'm trying to do right by you. I'm trying to do the right thing, and if you do this thing for me, I will treat people better. That sort of carrot versus the stick mentality, and it just plays super interestingly. And I love that you can make that sort of parallel to Dukat, the character who our universe Kira hates the most, is the person that she's most like in the Mirror Universe. And I'll talk a little bit, again, I'll save the Mirror Universe Kira for just a little bit more, but I just love those bits with her in this episode. And I also love the bits where Sisko sort of gets to have his moments with Jennifer again. It felt very cathartic, it felt very warm and good. And again, this is the first time we really got to see Jennifer in a way, shape, or form in the series. She obviously has a living presence throughout the entirety of the show from the very first episode, but this is the first time we kind of get to meet her. And I really love his interactions with Sisko, and that Jennifer's actually able to tell that, he isn't her Sisko from her universe, that he's a kinder person, a deeper person. And I like that she's able to tell that. And I like that bond that they built here that's sort of, again, built upon later on in a more nuanced way than one would expect. So just a fantastic job here. And I also really love Sisko's smile when she kisses him at the end. All right, getting into the home stretch here. The last Star Trek Discovery episode on my list, The Wolf Inside. I was actually so surprised when I first went into this. I thought The Wolf Inside, the second episode of Discovery's Mirror Universe episodes, would be at the very bottom. I remember not really caring, not really liking it. But rewatching it, I thought it was definitely the best Mirror Universe episode there was. Mostly because it felt very standalone and felt like it was having an interesting conversation about identity and if who we pretend to be becomes who we are. Burnham's sort of starting to deal with the fact, like, I have to do evil stuff to be in this universe. Tyler Voke is sort of dealing with this thing of, like, am I Tyler? Am I Voke? Am I this other person? And, is pretending to be Tyler mean that I'm not who I want to be? I'm not Voke anymore? And then getting confronted with his Mirror Universe self, who is a weird amalgam of the two. He is a rebel leader like Voke was. He is a fighter. He's a Klingon like Voke was. But he's also fighting to unify people, which is exactly the opposite of what Voke wanted, but what Tyler wants. So it was just so fascinating to see that even in the Mirror Universe, this interesting dichotomy within Voke's character was at play here. And seeing Voke Tyler, our Tyler, having to deal with that and reconcile that and not knowing how to handle it and just lashing out violently at this very crucial moment where Burnham's trying to get everyone to trust her was just fantastic and really deep and interesting. And then Tyler cracking at the end of the episode. Terrifying moment when, Voke came out and you're like, oh my God, she's on her own. This is the worst possible time for him to twist and turn like this and betray her. It was leaving her feeling so isolated, and Burnham having to, pretend to sacrifice him. And then at the end, when Burnham's whole plan, where she tries to save the rebels, gets upended, and her father's figure gets killed, Vogue gets killed on that planet. They just get murdered despite her best efforts to try and save them, in sort of a interesting mirror inversion of the first TOS episode, where Kirk tried to do the same thing, say save this race on this planet, and Burnham tries to do the same thing and fails. Just really, really strong stuff in this episode that I thought was more forgettable than it was, but rewatching I'm like, no, this is strong writing. And I was very surprised to find that this was my favorite Mirror Universe Star Trek Discovery episode. I will also, some quick notes that I really like here. I liked seeing Bearded Sarek, that was fun. I liked seeing the mundanity of the Mirror Universe in that opening montage. We got to see, like, what is an everyday life like in the Mirror Universe, in, the Terran Empire. And we got to actually see that here. I thought that was fascinating. Alright, third from the top, crossover, the best Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode, and the first one. And here's where I'm going to talk mostly about Mirror Kira, because this is her showcase episode. Mirror Kira Nerys is the best thing about all of the Mirror Universe Deep Space Nine episodes. Nina Visitor blows it out of the water. She is having so much fun hamming this character up, but giving her this slight, terrifying edge to her. And again, very Ducat-esque. She's very personable, very seemingly open, and very able to get people to talk to her, and very willing to get people to trust her. And yet you know that she could flip on a dime and just kill so many people. And the fact at the end of the episode where she's just like, I've been trying to be nice, and now I've got to murder you all. Such a great, fantastic build for her character. And in every episode that she appears in, she is probably one of the best things about that episode. And then contrasting that with playing our universe Kira, Nina Visitor just playing both characters, fantastic. Just wonderful showcase. There's also some really great stuff with Bashir and O'Brien in this episode. O'Brien's speech at the end of the episode to Kira is a fantastically written and very emotionally and moving speech, as you see O'Brien sort of having to come reconcile this idea. Is like, maybe there is a better way. He's sort of inundated with this idea of like, no, I can't escape this, I can't do this. But getting that hope, that spark, to make him believe, like, maybe we could change it. Maybe we can make it different. And I also really like some of the inversions of a lot of our characters. We get Quark, who is a good guy in this universe and gets killed immediately. We have Benjamin Sisko, who's an asshole here. We have Odo, who is sort of this, like, whip-cracking slave leader. And I also gotta give the writers credit. It was such a clever take to say it would have been easy to say, yeah, the Terran Empire still exists, and we're gonna have the characters going through the Terran Empire. But they took the Mirror Universe and did something different with it by saying, no, humans are subjugated now, and the Klingons and their Cardassians are in the role, because you could see that makes sense. You could see that, the Terran Empire was horrible, and so having them get their comeuppance in a way was fantastic. And then that idea of like, but humans still don't deserve this treatment. It's like, one bad thing does not beget another bad thing, and the Klingons and Cardassians are terrible people and doing terrible things to humans, and that doesn't negate the fact that humans did terrible things to them, but it doesn't make it right. And so that's such a great, interesting, nuanced idea that I wish they could have explored a little bit more. I would have liked to see some more discussion of the evils that the Terran Empire did and what caused it to lead to this Klingon-Cardassian empire, instead of just given it as exposition. But the concept is super, super strong, and I really like that they didn't just take the easy route and say like, oh yeah, the Terran Empire still exists and they're all evil there. That there are good guys and bad guys, and there's a lot of nuance, and really speaks to why I love Deep Space Nine. Second from the top is the original one, the one that started it all off, Mirror Mirror. What a fantastic episode of the original series. Just a lot of fun seeing our characters ham it up, but a great discussion of the possibilities of fascism and what fascism could do to us instead of believing that we could believe in our better natures, but we succumbed to fascism and went to the stars with that mentality. Especially, this show took place only 20 or so years after World War II. And still, unfortunately, speaks to a lot of the stuff we're dealing with today. There's a fantastic performance by Leonard Nimoy as Mirror Universe Spock in that goatee. Fun little investigation plot where they're trying to figure out what this is. And again, I know I talked about this in Discovery where it's like we already kind of know what's going on here, but I think the way the original series does it makes it, the fact that it was the original version and they're sort of exploring the concept of the Mirror Universe, not just sort of like, oh, we're in the Mirror Universe like Discovery does, I think makes it work a little bit better here because they're exploring some of the ideas and some of the dangers that the mirror universe has, and sort of setting up a lot of these tropes that will become commonplace in mirror universe fiction, not just in Star Trek, but in any story. Like when you go to a mirror universe, evil universe episode, you have people with goatees, you have people backstabbing people, you have torture chambers. That kind of all came from Star Trek here. So a lot of credit for some really cool original ideas going on in this episode. You also had some fun stuff with Uhura actually kind of taking charge and using her sexuality in a very interesting way to sort of come up at Sulu and distract Sulu. Again, I wish that Uhura didn't usually mainly have to use her sexuality in most Star Trek episodes, but the fact that she does that here it was very interesting and intriguing way to do that. And I like how Kirk and Spock have that sort of moment at the end where Kirk says, look, I charge you with changing this. This isn't logical. This isn't the best way for it to be.
In every revolution, there's one man with a vision.
Captain Kirk, I shall consider it.
So, Mirror, Mirror, really strong episode. But the top spot is reserved for A Mirror Darkly, the Star Trek Enterprise two-parter, because these episodes are probably the best episodes that Star Trek Enterprise has to offer. And this is coming from someone who actually legitimately likes Enterprise and thinks that Season 3 and Season 4 of Enterprise are actually up there with some of the best that Star Trek has to offer in general. I know Star Trek Enterprise haters, that's a big thing to say, but I think it's true. When you think about these episodes, everyone tends to remember the second half, because it was the 50th anniversary Star Trek, or 40th anniversary Star Trek episode. We get to see the original bridge again, we get to see the Gorm, we get to see the original uniforms. There was some cool backstabbing fun stuff going on throughout that whole episode. But actually the first episode is really strong too. There's some really interesting discussions with Archer and how he has ambition and wants to be in command. There's some interesting backstabbing. But what I think is fascinating about these episodes in general is its look at the different turn we could make. Because in Mirror Mirror, in the original series, we kind of see the inevitable result of fascism. But here in A Mirror Darkly, there's a wonderful discussion. I think it's a discussion that we kind of deal with throughout all of Enterprise as a series. And so that's why I kind of like it thematically here, of how humanity could have taken a dark turn. And it's something that, again, speaks very much to what we're dealing with right now. You see it in that opening of the first Mirror Universe episode, where we get to see First Contact, but the end result of First Contact isn't friendship and caring that we saw in the movie, but it's hatred and fear and anger and violence and taking and fight and just killing the Vulcans. The first thing we do when we meet an alien race is kill them. And I really love that they chose to start the episode that way and showing like a direct contrast to a moment that we've seen in Star Trek and saying it could have gone one of these two ways. And here's how we get this way, and here's how we get this way. Do we believe in our better nature? Do we reach out with love and friendship, or do we reach out with hate and violence? We go to the stars with hate and violence. And I love how, while there's a lot of fun, campy, interesting stuff going on throughout these episodes, that, especially in the second episode and bits in the first, that's the main discussion. That how can, if humanity goes out in the stars with that idea, we could subjugate and we could hate and we could belittle and dehumanize other people. And it was just such a fascinating discussion of the dehumanization of the other, the hatred and bigotry that we could carry into the stars. If we don't grow, if humanity doesn't grow and become better, it's very possible, minus all the camp and fun Star Trek references, we could become this. And I think that that's kind of what Star Trek Enterprise is all about, the growing pains of how do we get from humans who are still not perfect to people who do believe in the better nature of humanity in Kirk's era, in Picard's era. I do love that Archer, throughout Enterprise and even in these episodes, is an imperfect human. And I think that these episodes do such a fantastic job of showing us the other side of the coin, of what could have been. And I think that was a perfect way for Enterprise to showcase that by using the Mirror Universe episodes. And again, there's so much fun, campy stuff, like all the characters hamming it up and having a lot of fun, and the cool twist that Archer gets murdered in the end, that Hoshi becomes the Empress. This is where it gets you, having all this ambition, but leading it to like people stabbing each other in their backs. And and not really building on trust and a good foundation of trust and love and caring is just eventually going to get everyone nowhere. There's so much backstabbing in these episodes that it just like, how does this even work? And we know it eventually it doesn't. Great stuff packed into these 2 episodes. I also should say there's some great performances in this episode, particularly Reed and Phlox. Reed sadly never really got a ton to do in Star Trek Enterprise, so I was glad to see in this episode he actually gets a lot of fun to sort of be the like asshole guy. And Phlox doing his best Mengele impression is just fun. Phlox is just, it's creepy and dark and scary, but I just kind of love that evil doctor sort of thing that he does in this episode. All right, that is my list of every Star Trek Mirror Universe episode, but what do you think? Do you agree with me? Do you hate my list? Do you think I was dumb and shouldn't have Star Trek Discovery on here at all? Or there were some episodes you wanted higher or lower or things like that? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Also, I feel like it would have been such a waste to have done all this research on the Mirror Universe episodes without doing a full-length video essay on it. So in addition to this video, I'm going to be doing another episode where I sort of talk about the Mirror Universe and what it means in Star Trek history and what it's sort of trying to talk about, what it shows us about humanity. So that'll be a different essay. Look for that in the near future. Hey interwebs, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked this and want even more analysis of geek topics on everything from Star Trek to DC Comics, or you want social and political analysis and discussions, or social and political discussions through geek topics, give my channel a subscribe. And if you want to actively help make my videos even better, consider giving to my Patreon page. Each and every bit helps make these videos truly awesome, and there are some cool perks and benefits of being a Patreon, like having your name listed below just like these wonderful, amazing people. And finally, I want to give a shout out to Patreon Stefan Schuchart, who is kind enough to be a Patreon at the Admiral level. Thank you so much, Stefan. Your support and the support of my other patrons truly means the world to me, and it's what keeps me motivated as a creator. But regardless of if you subscribe or give to my Patreon, I hope that all of you live long and prosper.